colleagues. My name is Manuela Fernandes Martins, and I'm your conference program coordinator. Gugu Wendy Kanye interviewed the late Professor Brenda Leibowitz and Senior Fellow Distinguished Professor Emeritus John Gardner in 2016. To one of the questions, Professor Leibowitz explained, some people are excellent teachers in the traditional sense, in that they teach well intuitively and do not really spend much time in professional development or conducting research on their own teaching. But it is becoming increasingly difficult to get the label excellent teacher without doing some research on your teaching, which is a challenge. To address teaching and learning excellence in an age of uncertainty, Dr. Kasturi Behari-Leak has graciously accepted our invitation. Before her keynote address, let us introduce you to her. I should have said, let us introduce her to you. I now call upon Dr. Kasturi Behari-Leak to deliver her keynote address. There will be a Q&A at the end, and then afterwards, Dr. Esme Straden to extend a word of thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that introduction. It's always difficult to see oneself in that form. But thanks for the creativity and for that acknowledgement. Good day, colleagues. Hello, everyone. It is a great honor and privilege to be here, and I want to thank Northwest University, from the VC to the DVC to the Chief Director of CTL, the conference organizing team and the coordinator. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this event, your second Teaching and Learning Conference, and I think it's an important moment and something that's going to grow wonderfully from strength to strength. I was commenting to Jessica that it's such an intimate conference. It feels homegrown. It hasn't become Uberized yet. And I wonder if you can keep that feel as you go ahead. Anyway, I've been asked to talk to you in my capacity as HELTASA chairperson, but certainly, the chair role is not the only identity I bear. So it's going to be crossing over into lots of other dimensions of my work. But to bring myself into the room fully, I would like to introduce myself as a Black South African female. Now, I don't say that gratuitously. Of course, you can see. But what it means is that when I enter, place me on the margins, sometimes understood, sometimes essentialized. But I do understand that also as something about owning a privilege that afforded me certain opportunities that other people didn't. I see myself as an activist scholar. I think I've been teaching and working at the intersection of critical theory and looking at what we've been socialized into from a critical lens. It's not an easy place to be, and one doesn't gather a huge fan club along the way. But it certainly allowed me not to become a passive recipient and reproducer. The extent to which that impacts other people is yet to be discovered. I also acknowledge my being in terms of a mother, wife, sister, daughter, etc. And certainly in what I do and how I facilitate and how I hold the space, these are important identities that come to the work. What I'm saying to you is what I do has everything to do with who I am. I think the Academy has foregrounded what we know instead of who we are. When we introduce ourselves to each other, we introduce in terms of credentials and job descriptions. So the Academy doesn't favor the humanity that is in each of us. And so the argument I would like to present today in relation to the fourth industrial revolution and everything artificial is to learn how to be real human beings and to stay connected to the very things that keeps us going around the tables at our universities. And it is the social project that we are connected to that will help us to move into the fourth industrial revolution age with strength and dignity and integrity. One of the problems with not being able to be who we are is that many of us at universities have never learned how to be in the traditional university. We're always struggling to find a way in, to belong. We're on the center, we're on the margins, not at the center, we're at the margins. Yet, who we are and what we know are so integrally part of each other. Ontology cannot be conflated with epistemology. Who we are is also rooted in context. And I know you've covered a lot of these sorts of ideas yesterday, and from what I've heard about the event yesterday, these are certainly trends and thoughts that are not new. I just want to affirm and perhaps cement some of these ideas in terms of the South African context. The phrase Global South has become quite topical now. It seems to be a vantage point that we must take cognizance of and use to our advantage in terms of what we can offer the world. So, different from the last decade, perhaps, of entering international relations and global partnerships in a deficit mode, eager to learn, please teach me, right? We can start asserting a different kind of positionality, one that says we've got a lot to teach, we've got a lot to show. And it is the very context in which we are embedded, challenged as it is, that has provided us with those critical lenses that the international arena is now looking towards for solutions. So the issue of biographies and geographies are very important in the work we do, whether as disciplinary lecturers or academic staff developers. it's important to be able to bring those to bear on the content you teach, the examples you use, the textbooks you choose from, how you design your lectures, what is your relationship with students in class, how do you relate to peers. And we need to look at how we can strengthen these. Because who we are matters. Our values, our integrity, our agency, our characters. This is superior to machines. We are relational beings and we can't be programmed. We learn from each other. We have to be accountable, therefore, for the mistakes we make with each other. And I think it is from this strong sense of self and being that we are going to handle the future in all its glory. Whether it's 4IR, artificial intelligence, SDGs, climate change, and the like. How do we nurture the self in uncertain times? So I want to talk a little bit about uncertainty. This age of uncertainty, and perhaps before uncertainty, we spoke about the age of super complexity. It evokes and provokes a sense of anxiety, right? As you think about the future and machines making decisions and automations, etc., there is a sense of what's happening, how can we cope, how do we deal with this, etc. But we need to think carefully, stand back, and just be a little bit critical about this giant leap we've been thrust into, right? We've heard about the first, second, third, and now we're in the fourth revolution, industrial revolution. Why revolution? Okay? And who decides that it is a revolution? What's behind the revolution? Do we just take it for granted? Is it big business? Is it industry? Is it capitalism? What is driving it? If we look beneath the surface, how are we able to recognize the affordances that a fourth industrial revolution has for us? And indeed it has. This is not about saying that it's not important and we can't be part of it, but it is about the criticality that is needed, not to be passive recipients. And so we continue speaking from a place that is not strong. If we had to congregate and confer on what this means for us in our context, what is our interpretation, without letting the interpretation be imposed, then I think we're in a far stronger place. Now, the fourth industrial revolution, as we know, and as Prof. Fourie has already touched on, and the panel yesterday, there's a lot to take on board. And indeed, it shows great signs and promise of helping us in terms of financial solutions, health solutions, predicting weather for climate change, etc., etc. But I think that we need to think seriously about what this means. I mean, just 10 years ago, looking at people walking across the road talking to themselves with a small talk piece, or sitting in their cars and talking to their steering wheels, it was strange, right? When does speed dating with a machine come into operation, and when does it stop being strange? So these things happen quite insidiously without us acknowledging, and they become normalized as a way to be. And how do we interact with that way of being? Now, the other sort of danger I see in terms of getting on this bandwagon, and to move from bandwagon metaphor to the notion of a conveyor belt, and then to move to train, are we an assembly line? You know, parts of a machine on a conveyor belt being put together. And so we're on the fourth round. The biggest concern for us in South Africa, I think, is a question of who's getting on the train, who's being left behind, right? So it is not a funny matter. It's not unimportant, inconsequential, that getting on the fourth IR train might mean that we leave a whole section of the community behind who cannot partake, who do not have access, etc., etc. And here we are asking the question, not here we are, but in general, in higher education, how can we prepare our students for the future? We have just begun to wrestle with the present after coming through a very horrendous past. So we need to be able to do both, to stretch into the future and rise to the challenge of what that future-ready graduate means, but also to be firmly grounded and rooted and in what it is that we need to resolve first as a people, as a nation, you know, as our signature on the different education taxonomies, frameworks that we've come up. Stop borrowing from the North and the West. We have enough expertise and diligence in the country to be able to say, this is ours. So the question of who will be left behind, I think, is an important ethical question for us as academics in the room, as educators in the room. And what will we do come 10 years, 15 years, when there's another huge eruption, and then we say, oh, where did that come from? Right, on the issue of uncertainty, I want to think about uncertainty slightly differently now. So if I think about where we've come from, I would argue that we've always been in an uncertain kind of existence. So for many people living under apartheid, life was uncertain. In the certainty of apartheid, we didn't know what would happen next. Then we saw that apartheid came to an end, but we were still uncertain. 1994, where would this country go? What is the potential? Are we going to make it? Will we be able to survive? We went through a period of transformation and then into a brief period of rainbowism, which was well needed in terms of bridging the gaps and pulling us together. In 2015, we stumbled upon another important critical moment in our histories with the student protests. And the student protests, especially in higher education and in civil society, have pointed out that for 25 years we had many blind spots about some of the issues that we needed to tackle. And so they raised the issue of what it means to feel represented, to belong, not to be invisible, to be heard, not to be marginalized. So what I'm trying to allude to is, in the 25 years, in being caught up in a kind of naivety and maybe wishful thinking and good intentions, we had lost some very important points along the way. And we cannot wait for another 25 years to have the same realizations. Now that uncertainty of the 2015 to 16, 17 period, it was quite visceral and tangible in the Western Cape. At my university, as you know, is where the Rhodes statue fell. But in that uncertainty, there was a productivity that came with it. It opened up a new way of thinking about the curriculum. Okay, we started asking some deep questions about the purpose of the curriculum. What is knowledge? Whose knowledge? How is it produced? As an academic developer myself, a lot of my work had been geared towards enabling epistemological access. What does that mean? Helping, supporting, enhancing students in their ability to access the different curricular disciplines, etc. But what the 2015 moment gave us was a moment to ask, what epistemology? Right? So whose knowledge? We had taken that for granted. So all the textbooks, the bodies of knowledge, we had never questioned. That was given and that was accepted. But when students started questioning, what does it mean to study in a way where you never feature as an important part of the content building? What does that do to the human psyche? What does it do to self-worth? And then we want graduates to be future ready and critical thinkers, etc., when there's a whole host of emotive and affective issues that are never tackled at the university. So the curriculum question also gave us a way to think outside the technical way that we had been thinking about curriculum in terms of notional hours, programs, levels, credits, etc. Important as those are, the curriculum change that had been proposed now is looking at the cognitive and the affective, epistemic and social. What are the gaps and absences in our curricula? Where did we inherit the curricula from? What does it mean to teach in a discipline? If you look at the word discipline itself, how have we been disciplined into thinking in those ways? Are those the best ways? The way that we do research. What is a disciplinary angle? Okay? So through those moments, there are many interventions and initiatives now that are looking at how we can think differently, to be more inclusive, socially just, and to work towards a social project of bringing some sort of equity and equality to people who have not had the privilege and the same resources in coming into the system. So, productive uncertainty then, not to be paralyzed by the anxiety that uncertainty can evoke, means that we have to reckon with who we are and what our purpose in higher education is. Why is it that we get up every day and come to work? What are we connected to? What is our concern? What is our commitment? Now, getting back to the 4IR, you might have spoken about already, and I think it's already, quite well known. The 4 C's, they call it: critical thinking, collaboration, communication, and creativity, among many others, are the aspects that we should be building into our teaching and learning and trying to foster these in our students in the different things they do. So critical thinking is an important aspect. Now, if I ask you, how long have we put critical thinking into our course guides, mission and vision statements, curriculum guides, etc.? What is critical thinking? We've said it so many times, I'm not sure that it has any meaning left. Not that it's not important, but we've just heard critical thinking over and over without thinking, what does it mean to be critical from a particular location, from a particular body, from a particular lens on the world? Those criticalities are different to taking a problem and looking left and right and calling it critical. So I'm suggesting a different way of being critical as we enter this age of uncertainty. And here I lean on the notion of critical being. So together with critical thinking, we need to encourage in our students and ourselves a notion of critical being. This is drawing on Catherine Broom's work, 2011 paper on the critical being. Now, she says that the being is made up of 5 layers or levels, and I'm sure we could add 1 or 2 to it. But the physical being, which has to do with a particular body located in space, the intellectual being that can engage with knowledge and research and all things epistemic, the spiritual being. Now that is something that is not foregrounded, even spoken about in our interchange with knowledge in higher education. We leave that at the door when we walk into the classrooms. So actually, in a sense, we walk in as robots already. Because we leave our humanity at the door. We leave who we are, where we come from, etc. Because we've been taught, that the higher education classroom is not sympathetic to that. I'm making a huge generalization here. This is not to say you don't understand your students. I'm making a comment on higher education in general and how the academe has favored the cognitive over developing the critical aspects of being. We need both of these as we move into the future. So, linking this to teaching and learning and the notion of excellence, we have to transform the way we teach by encouraging critical thinking and being, but also by de-linking from the ways that have come thus far, or the ways in which we have thought thus far. And so in terms of teaching, we have to think about how do we move from pacifying classrooms to participatory classrooms? How do we move from a class where students nod and say, yes, thank you, to a rigorous atmosphere where people can debate and talk and question freely without fear of consequence? So we can't get to that section in the lecture where we switch to group work and expect that everyone talks if we haven't created the conditions for that to happen before it happens. So in everything we do, from the time that you greet your students to the time you wrap up, students are reading you and reading your humanity and reading your being. And if you are not creating the conditions for them to feel free, included, comfortable, confident, then we are not going to get the critical thinking and beings that we need and want to move into the future. Now, I'd like to offer a particular way of thinking about this. This is not a formula or recipe, but certainly some work at UCT where we've been involved with looking at 3 metaphors of pedagogy. And we draw on the decolonial scholarship from Latin America to do this. The 3 metaphors are knowledge, being, and power. The idea is if we work quite closely and intentionally with these in the teaching interaction, we might be able to uncover and unpack some of the baggage and backlog and some of the emotional sort of responsibilities that lie with both students and teachers. So, in terms of knowledge, we might have an obligation to look at the knowledge we engage with in our different disciplines, to go back, let's say, to the science textbooks and acknowledge the history of science, that history has everything to do with science. We might want to go to the commerce classroom and talk about dealing with humanities and how can we work with scientific paradigms and human ways of looking at numbers, for example. So this cross-interdisciplinary ways of thinking outside the ways we've been disciplined is an important challenge in terms of how we work with knowledge. And which knowledge? What is African scholarship about? Can we reference when we write journal publications, etc.? There is a lot of scholarship. Who are we referencing? What are we signaling when we reference in that way? Harry Garuba, who is at UCT, speaks about the idea of the traveling disciplines, that when knowledge travels from the north to the south, when it did, it lost a lot of its nuance, right? It got excised and streamlined. And the word empirical, very interesting, is knowledge for empire. So when we do research, we collect empirical evidence, right? So to just rethink what does that mean in terms of how we engage with disciplines, knowledge, and the like. Now the second metaphor is a notion of being, and it comes back to the notion of critical being. How do we work with being in the classroom? Now, I've put on the slide 2 ontologies, if you like, the ways of thinking about who we are. The first one you might recognize as a famous saying by Descartes, which is, I think, therefore I am. Let's say I put I in bold. I think, therefore I am. What does that foreground about your sense of self and who you are in the world? If we had to put in bold, I think, therefore I am. What does that foreground in terms of the dominance of cognitive over all aspects of being? At the bottom of the slide, you will see and recognize the ontology of Ubuntuism. I am because you are. This is very African. This is something that we do and live every day. Yet it is not an ontology that we build in the classroom in explicit ways. We are very interested, and I think the hyper-capitalist neoliberal university has forced us into a highly competitive mode among students. Getting up the ladder, being the first in the class, the awards we give out, important as they are, have become a different mark of what it means to be excellent. Students in many classes are struggling with aspects of their being. The two most interesting ones, and you will know from the news, have erupted in school classrooms. Hair. Hair is a topical issue. And when you think about hair being relaxed, straightened, disciplined, you understand the extent to which the human being has been conditioned to think of a particular norm as a way to be. This is a very unhealthy way for students to engage in classrooms. We need to face up to this. We need to think about what does it mean to be in a classroom where some students do not feel in their full power and agency. The other very important thing that many of us are concerned with is the issue of skin lightening creams. Right? I'm not sure whether this resonates with you, but certainly in my neck of the woods, it's about fairer is better, lighter is better. Okay? We have to think deeply about what makes people do this. What is the gold standard? What's the mark of excellence that makes somebody who does not have a lot of money spend money on hair and skin lightening? What is the effect of that? How does that compare with the fourth industrial revolution now? Are we aware of the gaps we need to fill before we're able to take on the full implications? So this again is not to say that the fourth industrial revolution does not have a place. Actually, it's going to happen whether we like it or not. It is about the ethical obligations as educators in our class, not to be blind to the real aspects that students are going through. Right, the last metaphor is the issue of power. So if we deal with the power dynamics in the class, it might be one way of undoing some of the normalized ways in which we have been socialized. So power does not, the opposite of power does not mean tyranny, but it's acknowledging that the power that the teacher has to silence, to render invisible, and acknowledging how you can change your pedagogies in order to make that happen differently. So when we look at, at UCT, there's been a lot of talk and a lot of action around renaming buildings and spaces to create a more conducive atmosphere. Indeed, around the world, this has been the trend now, renaming, reclaiming museums, New York, etc. Now I want to take it to a classroom of sorts. So if we think about the origins of the university being in the medieval period, we can see the close parallels between church and university. Actually, if you think about the whole structure of the church, from deans, right, to even the graduation ceremonies in terms of the disciplines, the faculties, the fact that disciples also follow a discipline, etc. And I use the church as an example, and I think it is true for many organized religions, that in this picture you have somebody at the lectern who is speaking from a place of faith and belief. And the people who are sitting on the benches are listening with great enthusiasm and great sense of belief. Now, there's nothing wrong with this. Religion is based on a sense of belief and faith. What does become problematic is when that translates into that. Now, the classroom is not a place of blind faith and belief. The lecturer is not the minister at the pulpit. The class can't be passive in accepting everything that the lecturer has to say. The academic classroom should be a place where you can't do in church, i.e. in the middle of a sermon say, "Excuse me, Father, I have a problem with what you're saying. I've got a critical thought on that chapter." But we would expect that the university classroom would be that place. So to understand how space and place affect the way students are, and how you can think about the spatial dynamics in your classrooms. It is fantastic that we are sitting at round tables. It's a pity that this is a keynote and not a workshop, but it would be absolutely conducive to seeing each other, looking at each other, interacting in ways that are meaningful. It is very difficult to do that in the university classroom. So the pedagogies have to compensate where the spatial dynamics don't allow. Okay, so I want to say and perhaps leave you with the notion that we've got a lot to think about in our context, especially in terms of teaching. There is a sense of discomfort in moving into the uncertainty in terms of higher education and where we need to go. But discomfort can be managed well if there's a pedagogy of care. How we balance those two are up to us, and how we're going to use that to the best of our ability with the right intentionality and understanding what our projects are. So I want to ask you, what do you feel passionately about? Being at Northwest University, being in South Africa, being in higher education, what lights your fire as an academic? What is your purpose? How does this translate into the classroom? Is it the same for our students? How can we build the relational and the relationships? Gayatri Spivak, post-colonial scholar, says, "Who should speak is less crucial than who will listen. When I speak from a position, whatever position that might be, I should be listened to seriously." Thank you.
Colleagues, we have some time for a few questions. Question there? Mel? Your voice is loud enough, I'm sure they will hear you.
I would like to ask, in line with the conference theme, around possibilities, what do you envisage as immediate and long-term possibilities around bringing in a pedagogy of discomfort and a pedagogy of care? In other words, sitting with the discomfort, but also bringing in a pedagogy of care. what does that open up for us almost immediately in higher education?
Mel, is that a question for me or for the house?
That's for you. I'm pulling that out of what I heard you say.
Well, I'd like to think that this was a pedagogy of discomfort here at some points in the room.
Okay.
It wasn't easy for me, and I think it wasn't easy for you. Sometimes to hear, right, some aspects that don't sit well. I would like to think that there was a pedagogy of care, that the intention wasn't to disrupt and make people feel in a particular way. And I feel relieved that both worked well. I don't know how you felt. What it does for me as a teacher is it has answered my question about the responsibility I have as a speaker here. So in tune with who I am and what I consider important, I have ticked the box against my own benchmark in terms of sharing what is important. But I've done it with a responsibility. And I think that kind of approach has great potential in the classroom. And it is in the classroom, when you look at your content and look at the material that we regurgitate and sometimes don't take enough time to put a critical lens on, is to allow students those moments maybe to talk among themselves. How does this feel? Does this make you feel discomforted? Why? That doesn't mean we move into a therapeutic space or become the psychologist in the room. But it is the acknowledgement of the humanity of that feeling that will take the teaching and learning to another place.
Thank you.
Yeah. Colleagues, any other questions? Comments?
So, I've been at the NWU for about 2.5 years now, and I was very excited when I saw the words ethics of care in our dream. But I often wonder, in the institution working here every day, how are we balancing two views on care? So Noddings has this view that we cannot have caring institutions. And yet other writers such as Tronto Held, Stephen Asen, they've written extensively about how political systems and public policy could be caring. And I just wonder, as someone in higher education, working at an institution which kind of strives towards embodying this ethic of care, where can we find the middle ground between institutional enabling to care and the individual's responsibility to care?
Thank you for that. I think that's a terribly important question. My intuitive response is to say that part of that care has to reside on both ends of the spectrum, with the leadership and on the ground. And I think that if leadership does not signal strongly an ethic of care, not just in terms of mission and vision statements and policies that come up, but really in the day-to-day attention and detail, then the message is a mixed signal as it comes down the line. And I think equally on the ground, not just exercising the care, in a very responsible way, we have to demand the care. So it's a meeting of those two responsibilities, I think, that gets us closer. So it's not to accept when care is not given or is not expected in a place where human beings come together.
Colleagues, we have time for one more. For a comment?
Hello, this is Baby Moore for comments. So I'm just thinking we have to move from creating safe spaces to creating nurturing, brave spaces.
Thank you. everybody will agree with that. So, let me just give a just some takeaway from my side again is definitely, and the fact that we're not asking a lot of questions does not mean we are not thinking about it. I will take away and think again about my positionality within Northwest, my positionality within the Global South, and then how will I be positioned as an academic developer in the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And you just have this wonderful ability to make people think. I think, that is amazing. So I'm sure everyone, each one of you will take something home. And you are, as you are sitting there thinking, and actually want to say something, say it, reflect on that, say it to yourself, even if you don't say it in an open forum. Kasturi, thank you for coming to Northwest, bringing the knowledge from the north, from the south to the north, from UCT. Even in your busy schedule, you just say, yes, I'm coming. So thank you very much for that, and thank you for your leadership in the sector. Thank you for your leadership in nationally, in teaching and learning, and from my side, thank you for being a mentor to me. And thank you very much. Let's give a big applause.